Joining us from Singapore is Emil Wolter. He's head of regional strategy at RBS. Emil, I mean, even the IMF has cut its forecast, but you're actually penciling in a full-blown recession now.
That's my personal expectations. It's not yet the view of the bank. I think, there's a classic lag between what forecasters are ready to predict and what actually tends to end up playing out. So at the moment, yes, everything I look at across the advanced economies suggests that growth will be negative next year.
Right, but how long does it last for, and how deep will this be?
Yeah, that's a good question, and clearly I don't have the answer to that. But my feeling is that most people expecting this to be a relatively good recession, quote unquote, compared to that of 3 or 4 years ago, saying that the output gaps are bigger and therefore, the relative downside should be lower. I think that is to no small extent offset by the fact that obviously our ability to respond to economic weakness through policy is much reduced. How are you going to cut interest rates in America, for example, or how are you going to use fiscal policy proactively in Europe? Furthermore, clearly the risks of financial crisis are at least as great now as they were in 2007. And in fact, we're now talking about countries going bankrupt as opposed to just individual companies. So I think this could be a very big recession, to be honest.
Emil, very quickly, I mean, how does it, you talk about a recession, a global recession, but what about Asia? Do we manage to retain some growth here?
I think there are definitely some salient points as far as Asia is concerned. Most importantly, I believe our balance sheets are still much superior to those we see in the advanced economies. And when I talk about balance sheets, I'm talking about debt to GDP. I'm talking about the fiscal leeway that we have in terms of responding to negative external pressure, and I'm talking about the foreign exchange reserves that we have built up. Having said that, trade is a very significant driver on the margin of GDP in this region. Exports remain highly significant to economic activity. And I think, furthermore, sentiment and the knock-on effect that a slowdown in trade will have to domestic economies will see quite a few countries here also registering potentially negative growth.
Well, how do you as an investor hedge yourself against all this bad news that you say is coming along?
Well, the first thing is to basically prepare yourself mentally for this being the outlook. In other words, you have to stop hoping that things will get better by some whiff of a magic wand by a central banker in New York or in Frankfurt, and instead you have to basically think about what it means when the economic cycle rolls over. We look back over recessions on sort of over the past 25 years and found that Asian earnings tended to halve during these periods. There's been 4 recessions and 3 global recessions since 1989. Share prices tend to fall by 43%. And so the key thing here is to be in sectors that have relatively less earnings volatility, that are relatively less well owned, and obviously in those where expectations for the future are not too high.
Okay, you, I believe, have 2 recession baskets with 5 stocks. Talk to me about that.
What we did was we tried to look back upon, again, over past recessions. And it's a relatively simple, Simon, somewhat mechanical piece of analysis. But what we did was we said these sectors tend to display a very high level of earnings volatility, and the share prices in turn react quite heavily. And so far we've only seen limited falls in share prices, suggesting that there is still heavy downside. Those sectors are industrials and consumer discretionary. Here we see the biggest potential for further share price declines, and so we constructed a basket with the stocks that we feel have the most risk of further share price declines over the next 12 months. We did the same thing on a country level, and the countries we feel, on the basis of this piece of analysis, look most exposed are India and I think in particular Indonesia. And again here we constructed a basket of 5 names which we feel stand out as really risky into the environment that we foresee for the next year.
Thanks for that, Emil. Emil Wolter, he's from Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS.